In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars, they chose the wrong person to provoke, and by the time they realized, it was already too late. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The wind had teeth that morning. The trading post at Red Mesa sat squat and stubborn in the middle of nowhere, a battered outpost of planked walls, mule-tethered posts, and grit-choked shutters. Dust crawled in every crack like an occupying army. Freight wagons creaked in the yard, loaded with salt pork and tin kettles. The only color came from a frayed blanket strung across the front porch and the coppery streaks of dawn breaking over the buttes. Lisbeth Caldwell stood in the center of it, arms tight around two sleeping infants wrapped in a single wool shawl. Her hair was tangled from a sleepless night. Her lips were cracked. She had been left here. No note, no promise. Just the memory of Boothiel's walking away and not once looking back. The baby stirred against her chest. Twins, her twins. Her reason to keep her spine straight while every part of her wanted to fold. Behind her, the trader's wife muttered in clipped Navajo and slammed the door, fed up with the girl who wouldn't move. The door's closing left Lisbeth in silence. Again, save for wind and the hungry murmurs of her sons, she scanned the horizon. Nothing. The rider had said he would come. Said he had to settle debts in Santa Fe. That she and the boys would be safer here. That Red Mesa was neutral ground. Lisbeth had believed him. Now the red soil beneath her boots felt like a grave. The door opened again, but it wasn't the trader's wife this time. A child peered out, eyes round and suspicious. A boy, maybe 10, barefoot. He held a piece of fry bread and offered it without a word. She took it with a nod, broke off bits to press to her sons' mouths. Their tiny lips puckered and sucked. That was when the first rider appeared on the bluff, not the one she'd been waiting for. This man was too tall, too upright. He didn't slouch like a rancher or sway like a drunk. He had the posture of someone who never doubted his next step. His horse was coal-black and heavy, with tack that gleamed in the rising sun. He wasn't alone. 6 more followed. Dust devils trailed their hooves. The trader bolted the door. A voice shouted inside for the children to hide. Lisbeth remained where she was. Her legs shook, but she didn't run. There was nowhere to run. The buttes behind her offered no cover. The ground in front of her offered only blood. The lead rider stopped 10 paces away. He studied her with a sneer. "He left you here?" he asked. His accent was Southern Plains, whiskied and cruel. She didn't answer. "Left you with pups?" One of the others dismounted, sauntered toward her with a saddlebag in one hand and a rifle in the other. Lisbeth turned her body, shielding the boys. "We want what's owed," the first rider said. "He said he'd pay," Lisbeth said quietly. "He lied." The dismounted man grinned and dropped the saddlebag with a thud. It fell open. Inside, silver spurs, a blood-stained letter, a coin pouch sliced through. "With a blade. He's dead," the rider said. "Killed him myself." Lisbeth closed her eyes for a heartbeat. She opened them slowly. "Then you've got your revenge." "Not yet." The man reached for her. Then stopped. A low whistle split the air. All 7 riders froze. It came from the far end of the trading post, just beyond the corral, where the shadow of the stables cast a long finger across the sand. A figure stood, alone, motionless, watching. A man. Apache. Long black braids down his back. No shirt, just rawhide pants and moccasins. A single knife strapped across his chest, and a look in his eyes that stopped hearts. He didn't speak. He walked. Each step was measured. He didn't run, didn't flinch. Just crossed the ground between them like he owned the air. The dismounted man raised his rifle. The Apache didn't. Break stride. He was 10 paces away, then 5, then close enough to see the scar beneath his. Left eye, the rider hesitated. The Apache reached out and took Lisbeth's hand without a word. He pulled her gently toward him. Not fast, not forceful. Just firm enough to say, "Come now." She followed. Her knees nearly buckled, but she walked one step, then another. The rider stood stunned. The Apache turned his back to them, a gesture so bold it was insult. He led her toward the stable. She clutched. Her boys. Dust blew around their ankles. "You want to die too, Injun?" The leader shouted. No answer. The Apache stepped into shadow, and Lisbeth disappeared with him. Then came the scream. One of the riders collapsed sideways, blood spraying from a throat cut too fast to see. Another stumbled, knife embedded in his thigh. The stable door slammed shut. Gunfire erupted, but there was no target, only silence and the sound of the wind blowing across a blood-stained porch. And the sound of the wind blowing across a blood-stained porch was the only greeting to the dawn that broke over Red Mesa. For a moment, the trading post lay in stillness, a fragile calm after the storm of violence. Shafts of pale morning light cut through the stable's splintered boards, illuminating the scattered hoofprints in the sand and the dark smear where life had ended. Inside the stable, the Apache moved like a silent sentry. He knelt beside Lisbeth Caldwell, his hand gentle against her trembling shoulder. The twins, roused by the clamorous night, squirmed against the folds of the wool shawl. Their soft whimpers echoed through the loft above, where the horses had once sheltered. He made no effort to soothe them until he was sure the riders were far enough. Then, in simple Navajo, he murmured a lullaby older than memory. Lisbeth's heart stuttered at the unfamiliar cadence, but as her son's eyelids fluttered closed, she felt the taut cord of fear loosen by an inch. Outside, the 7 riders regrouped on the bluff. 2 lay moaning, 2 limped, 1 bled into his saddlebag. The leader, Tegan Blackthorn, scowled at the blood-splattered earth. He spat a curse and raised his pistol at the stable door, but his men dragged him back. "I got her," he snarled. "We paid him back. We got what we came for." "But not what we left with," grunted one of the brothers. "She's gone." "The Injun took her." "Ain't no use," Tegan snapped. "He's a ghost." He spat into the red dirt. "Let's ride. I'll find him." They departed, dust swirling like phantoms in their wake. Within minutes, Red Mesa was once more a ghost town save for the lone figure in the stable, and the woman clutching her children. Only the voiceless walls bore witness. The Apache rose and gestured for Lisbeth to follow. She stood, unsteady, the shawl heavy on her arms. His shadow stretched long and protective over her, a dark promise. They stepped into daylight. He led her around the corral to a narrow gap between the stables. There, half hidden in the dust and driftwood, sat a wagon while 2 horses grazed in silence. He pointed to the wagon's steps, then to the horses. Lisbeth understood. She climbed up, settling the twins on the straw-littered bench. One dark-braided hand lifted to steady her balance. The other reached for a strap carved into the wagon side. The Apache mounted behind her, silent as moonlight. His horse was led by a rawhide rein, looped casually over his wrist. She glanced back at the trading post's shuttered windows, at the battered porch with its copper streaks of dawn. A reckoning lay in that emptiness. A vengeance she had neither sought nor delivered. Where now? She asked in broken English. He halted at the wagon's rear and spoke a single word. "Hogan." Lisbeth's eyes flicked to the distant mesa. A warren of rock spires crowned by evergreen. The Apache territory. She exhaled. A prayer or a gasp, she wasn't sure. The wagon lurched forward, drawn by the 2 powerful horses. Dust rose in their wake, mixing with the memory of gunfire. Lisbeth wrapped the shawl tighter around her sons and watched the trading post recede. Not all stories have beginnings. Some are pivots from endings. This was her pivot. They traveled in silence. Only the creak of wagons and the faint shuffle of hooves broke the hush. The Apache rode with his face turned to the trail, eyes scanning scars in the landscape, each rock, each ridge, memorized. Lisbeth's heart hammered in her chest as the wagon rattled over scrubland. "Why?" she asked at last. He narrowed his eyes. "Your life took her." Her throat tightened. She swallowed. He didn't need to name the rider to whisk it away. In the dust. She had known from the first moment. That name was etched in her blood. 2 men, 1 forsaken mother. 7 avengers. He shifted the reins. The wagon slowed beside a narrow wash. He dismounted, offering his hand. Lisbeth slid down. Twins in arms, as he led her to a shallow pool of water beneath a cluster of pinyon pines. Their reflections shimmered. He knelt, cupped water in his palms, and silently offered it to her. She wet her lips and touched the cool droplets to her sons' foreheads. Their soft sighs of relief echoed in the whispering pines. He knelt further, tracing the water in sand symbols she could not decipher. Then he tapped the ground twice, looked up, and nodded. It was a directive. Follow the trail. They resumed travel, mid-journey. Ambush afternoon sun bore down like a hammer. Sirens of cicadas droned in the mesquite. Shadow lines shimmered under the wagon's wheels. Suddenly, 2 riders sprang from behind a sandstone butte. Their rifles boomed. Bullets whined past the horses' haunches. The pair rode headlong at the wagon. Lisbeth froze. The Apache cursed, spinning his horse around. He raised his own rifle, a short iron-barreled carbine, and returned fire. The first attacker whirled, chest splintered by the blast, and tumbled into the dust. The second wheeled, but the Apache was faster. Another shot. Another collapse. He vaulted from saddle to wagon's edge, arms powerful and precise. He hauled Lisbeth free and dashed to the front, yanking the reins to a sudden stop. The horses stumbled and whinnied but held firm. Lisbeth set her sons down and ran to him. "Thanks," she gasped. The Apache didn't smile. He surveyed the horizon. Those who would hunt them seeing only the dying dust. He beckoned again. They climbed back into the wagon without a word, but Lisbeth's hands shook. "Why protect me?" she demanded. He paused, reins in one hand, rifle cradled in the other. His dark eyes glinted. "Promise," he said. "My word." She swallowed. She trailed off. He nodded once, and the wagon lurched onward. The Hogan's refuge. They reached the mesa's base as the sun began its descent. A narrow path carved into rock led them upward. Horses strained up switchbacks, kicking up dust that clung to sweat-coated sweat. At the crest, a cluster of adobe dwellings nestled against a sheer cliff. Hogan homes, etched into sandstone, warm. Ochre walls pulsing with firelight. A small group waited, men and women in deerskin, children leaning from doorways. They watched the wagon approach with eyes like burnished coal. The Apache guided the wagon into a courtyard, where rough-hewn stables stood. He dismounted and offered Lisbeth his hand once more. "Safe," he said. No translation needed. By the time the autostars blinked awake, she and her sons were inside the largest Hogan. A fire flared low in the center pit. Blankets lined the walls. The scents of roasted maize and pinyon smoke mingled. A woman stepped from a curtained doorway. She was tall, dignified, with silver-flecked hair braided around her head. She bowed to Lisbeth, then to the Apache. "You brought her," she said. Simply, he nodded. She turned to Lisbeth. "You are safe." Tears pricked Lisbeth's eyes. She sank to her knees, arms sweeping the children tight. "Thank you," she whispered. The matron nodded, then turned her gaze to the Apache. He stiffened. "She rides back at dawn," the matron said. The Apache's shoulders tensed. She must face what she came to face. The matron continued. The Apache exhaled. Lisbeth looked up, alarmed. "But—" The matron raised a hand. "She will not journey alone." Lisbeth's pulse thundered in her throat. Night fell. Lanterns flickered. The Hogan stirred with muted song, and elder intoned prayers to earth and sky. The Apache and Lisbeth sat across the fire pit, twins cradled at her breast, blankets rustling with each tiny breath. He broke the silence. "You will return," he said. She met his gaze. "And you?" He looked away, eyes fixed on the fire. "Will you come?" she asked. He exhaled smoke from his nostrils. "I have obligations. Then I'll walk alone." His jaw clenched. She stood, arms full of children. "Thank you," she said. He rose, silhouette carved in flicker, without turning. He asked, "Do you forgive him?" Her legs trembled. She closed her eyes. "You will need that forgiveness," he said. Light danced across his scar. She whispered, "I'm trying." He lowered his gaze. "Tomorrow, the trail leads east." She nodded. He took a step away, then paused. "The night brings more than rest," he said quietly. Lisbeth's brow furrowed. He laid a finger across his throat. "Dream of blades." His words were a warning, and then he was gone into the shadows. Lisbeth's breath hitched. She stood alone by the fire. Above, the stars wheeled in silent witness. And in the hush, the twins stirred, tiny hands knotting in her hair as they dreamed of blood and steel. Lisbeth drew a shaky breath. Dawn would not bring peace. It would bring the reckoning she could not delay. The wind sighed through the hogan's door, a promise of storms yet to come. Cliffhanger. As the first gray light brushed the horizon, Lisbeth realized the true cost of her debt and the path it would force her to walk. Only then did she understand the Apache's final warning about blades in the night. Next part will continue, directly from Lisbeth's decision at dawn. Say continue when you're ready. The wind blowing across the blood-stained porch carried more than dust. Now it carried memory, warning, and war. Dawn broke brittle and colorless. The Hogan settlement stirred with cautious breath. Wood smoke climbed from a dozen chimneys, curling in silence. Inside the main Hogan, Lisbeth sat cross-legged, her sons tucked against her sides. Their eyes, still puffy from the restless night, studied her with unspoken trust. She had nothing to offer but closeness. The embers in the central fire pit glowed orange. The door covering rustled. He entered. The Apache warrior barefoot, silent, but more present than the rising sun. His braids were freshly tied with leather. A bone charm hung at his throat. Across his back, a bow and a quiver of fletched arrows. At his waist, the obsidian knife. Without a word, he knelt and extended a wrapped bundle. Lisbeth took it and unrolled the cloth. Inside lay a revolver, hers, the one she had last seen in a pack saddle weeks ago, before the father of her children disappeared south with lies in his mouth and regret in his eyes. She looked at him, startled. "You kept it?" He nodded once. "You knew I would need it." Another nod. A beat passed. Her hand tightened around the grip. "Then I guess it's time," she said. He stood and extended a second bundle. Food, wrapped cornmeal cakes and dried meat. He slung a second bow over his shoulder. When she didn't move, he offered his hand. She took it. The matron stepped into view, lifting the shawl from Lisbeth's shoulders and replacing it with a heavier woven cloak dyed with earth tones. "Go before the trail remembers you," the elder woman whispered. The path down the mesa was slower than the climb had been. Not just from weight, but from what waited below. By mid-morning, they were riding east, her in the wagon with the children, him on horseback. The desert grew silent again until the buzzards appeared, 3 of them. Circling low, she squinted. There, to the south of the wagon trail, smoke. "Too thin for campfire," she murmured. He had already changed direction. 10 minutes later, they crested a ridge and saw the wreckage, a burned-out stagecoach, scattered cargo, a wheel still turning lazily in the ash. A woman lay near the wreck, face down, dress charred and clinging to her back. Blood had dried in her hair. The Apache dismounted and knelt. "Dead," he said. Lisbeth saw it too. But not just the woman. Near the cargo sat a child, no older than 4, covered in soot. Not crying, just staring at nothing. Lisbeth climbed down from the wagon and ran. The boy blinked at her. She knelt, offered her hand. He didn't take it. She wrapped her arms around him. Anyway, they buried the woman under cairns of stone. The child never spoke. When they resumed their journey, he rode with Lisbeth. She fed him pieces of corn cake, wiped his face with a strip of her dress, and named him Caleb. By sundown, they reached the outskirts of a mining outpost. That lantern, the Apache halted them half a mile out. He gestured toward the sky clouds. Gathering. Trouble. You mean weather? He shook his head. He pulled a red kerchief from his pouch and tied it around his wrist. Lisbeth tensed. The men who followed us? He didn't answer. She looked toward the town, where the wooden buildings leaned in strange angles. Too many windows broken. Too many doors swinging on one hinge. It wasn't just disrepair, it was desertion. He stepped off his horse and handed her the reins. Stay here. She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave him. He walked into that lantern, like a man with nothing to fear. It took half an hour. Then she saw it. A flare. Green. The signal. She urged the horses forward. The wagon groaning, he met her at the blacksmith's forge. His eyes were darker than before, angrier. Blood was drying on his knuckles. Raiders? Not anymore. She said nothing. The boy at her side leaned against her, watching the Apache with silent reverence. He motioned her toward the boarding house, the only structure still intact. Inside, they found a pantry of preserved food and a fireplace still warm. The upstairs held cots. The children slept within minutes. Lisbeth waited until they were alone. Why here? He passed through. She froze. You mean the one who left me? He nodded. Double quotes. How do you know? He opened his palm. A playing card, burnt at the edges, the ace of clubs. She remembered. The man she loved used it to mark the gatepost when he left her in Red Mesa. A warning, or a farewell. He's gone east, the Apache said. To where? Fort Amory. She stood. Then we go east. He rose too, but slowly. There's something else, he said. What? He opened the closet door. Inside, a man. Tied. Gagged. Bleeding. Lisbeth took a step back. The Apache nodded. One of the gang. She approached slowly. The man struggled, eyes wide. He knows where they took the stolen girls. She froze again. Stolen girls? 10 from the southern ranches. The man inside the closet mumbled furiously. Lisbeth turned to the Apache. He'll tell us. He will, the warrior said, stepping forward. But not yet. He closed the door. Tonight. We sleep. But she did not sleep. She watched her children dream, and held the gun beneath her cloak. In the distance, thunder rolled. At sunrise they moved. The man in the closet had confessed. The stolen girls were bound for Fort Amory, to be sold as contracted workers under a corrupt colonel. Lisbeth rode with fire in her lungs. He took our money, our children, and now this. The Apache nodded. They reached Fort Amory by dusk. It was no fort, just a walled-in encampment, a dozen watchtowers, barbed wire, and guards in blue uniforms who didn't ask questions, just took gold and looked away. Lisbeth parked the wagon outside the perimeter. The Apache vanished into the brush. He returned after nightfall, soaked from the waist down, river mud on his moccasins. We can get in through the drainage ditch, he said. She nodded. But what about the children? He motioned behind them. From the shadows, the matron of the Hogan settlement appeared. Lisbeth gasped. You came? The older woman nodded. Children must stay, she said. Mothers must fight. Lisbeth leaned forward and pressed her forehead to the matron's. Then she turned to the Apache. Let's end this. They crawled through mud and filth. The drainage ditch stank of old rot and despair. Rats scurried along the banks, but at the far end, they emerged into a dark alley inside the fort. From there, they moved fast, silent, Knife and shadow. The Apache took down 2 guards with stone precision. Lisbeth followed, her revolver in hand. They reached the holding pen. Barred. Locked. Inside girls. Ages 10 to 16. All dirty. Silent. Terrified. Lisbeth shot the lock. "Run!" she whispered. The girls obeyed. Alarms blared. Voices shouted. Gunfire. The Apache covered their escape, arrows flying with deadly grace. Lisbeth stood over a bleeding officer. "Where's the colonel?" The man spat blood. "West Barracks." She found the colonel mid-drunken stupor. He looked up from his desk, eyes glassy. "You," he whispered. "You were the one." "Left at Red Mesa." "I was." She raised her gun. "Wait," he begged. "You don't have to." She pulled the trigger. At dawn, Fort Amory burned. Lisbeth and the Apache rode west with the rescued girls and their makeshift caravan. The matron led the children. Caleb held Lisbeth's hand. She looked to the warrior. Beside her, he was watching the rising sun. "You didn't have to come," she said. He turned. "I gave my word." She took his hand. "Then stay." He nodded once. Behind them, the desert wind picked up. Ahead, a new trail waited. And Lisbeth Caldwell would ride it with her sons, her daughter Kin, and the silent warrior who had offered her his hand without a word. Cliffhanger. But on the 3rd night of the journey home, a rider appeared in the dark. One she had thought long dead. One who now rode not alone, but leading 100 more. Say, continue when you're ready for the next part. The wind off the canyon curled with a predator's breath that night, carrying the scent of iron, pine smoke, and something older, something that made the horses tremble long before Lisbeth heard the first hoofbeats. She stood by the campfire, feeding the rescued girls spoonfuls of stew from an old enamel pot. Caleb slept beneath a heavy blanket, curled protectively against her hip. The Apache, whose name she still did not know, sat on a rock's edge, sharpening his blade by starlight. His posture was always the same, half rest, half readiness. But tonight, something had shifted. Even the steel in his hand paused mid-stroke. He had heard it. Lisbeth turned, searching the horizon. Beyond the fire's halo, the scrubland pulsed with silence. Then there, a flicker, a shape at the edge of dark. One rider. Then 2, then 5. A line formed. No torches, no calls. Just silhouettes on horseback stretching across the ridge like teeth on a blade. The warrior stood slowly, his knife vanishing. Beneath his coat, "Riders," Lisbeth whispered, already moving to gather the children. He didn't answer. More hooves joined. The ground trembled like a held breath. Then came the signal. A single pistol shot. Not aimed. Not hostile. A message. The Apache's jaw clenched. His eyes didn't blink. From the line, one rider dismounted. The horse pawed the dust, uneasy. The man walked alone into the glow of the fire. Lisbeth's heart stopped. His coat was the same. His boots. The way he moved, like the world owed him breath for every step. Malcolm. She breathed. The man smiled. "Hello, Beth." The girls huddled tighter behind her. The Apache moved silently between them and the fire, body angled. Malcolm spread his arms. "I said I'd come back. You're late. I never gave a date." Her grip on the ladle tightened. Behind Malcolm, riders remained. "Still. 100? Maybe more. Who are they?" Lisbeth asked. "My friends." "Mercenaries?" He smiled. "Brothers." The Apache's eyes narrowed. Malcolm turned to him. "I've heard of you. The shadow without a name." The Apache said nothing. Malcolm faced Lisbeth again. "I came for you. For them." He gestured toward the children. "You saved them. I'm proud." "You left us." "I left you safe. You lied." Malcolm's smile faded. "You were being hunted. I had to draw the fire." The Apache moved forward, slow and deliberate. "You started the fire," he said. Malcolm's hand went to his belt, but paused. "No. I just struck the first match." Lisbeth stepped forward. Why now? Because the fort burned. Word's out. There's a bounty on your head, Beth, and his. Everyone wants a piece of the people who stole back the stolen. He stepped closer. Come with me. I have men. Guns, gold. You won't survive out here. Lisbeth stared at him. You're not here to help. I am. You want the legend. You want to wear it like a coat. He reached out. The Apache blocked his arm with the back of his blade. Malcolm pulled back, slowly. So it's like that? Lisbeth's voice was cold. It's like that. Malcolm nodded once. Behind him, the line of riders split. And the trap. Close. From the south, more horsemen. From the east, wagons. Nets, chains. The Apache had his bow out in one breath. An arrow flew. A man screamed. Chaos exploded. Lisbeth grabbed Caleb and ran. The girls scattered. Some screamed. Some fought. Most froze. The Apache was everywhere, knife, bow, gun. A shadow made of fire. But there were too many. Chains clinked. A wagon gate slammed. Lisbeth fired her pistol into the dark. Once, twice. Then nothing. Malcolm dragged her down. Stop. It's over. She spat in his face. He backhanded her. Caleb cried out. The Apache appeared behind Malcolm and slammed the tomahawk into the ground inches from his boot. Malcolm spun. They fought. Brutal, silent, flesh and bone. But Malcolm was faster. Then Lisbeth remembered. He drew blood. The Apache stumbled. Lisbeth screamed. Malcolm raised his blade, then stopped, because all around them, guns cocked, but not at the Apache. At Malcolm. From the northern ridge, a new line of riders. The Hogan warriors. Matron in the lead. She held a long rifle. Enough, she said. Malcolm hesitated. Drop it, she warned. He did. The Apache rose, bleeding, breathing, alive. Lisbeth rushed to him. Caleb wrapped around her waist. The Hogan warriors fanned out. The mercenaries retreated. Malcolm looked around. You don't want to kill me. No, Lisbeth said. We want you to walk, like you did before, he grinned. This isn't over. Correct, the matron said. Now it begins. Cliffhanger. Under the stars, as the camp settled once more, the Apache finally spoke his name. And in doing so, revealed a secret that changed everything Lisbeth thought she knew about who had sent him that first day. And why? Night settled over the desert like a shroud, heavy with the weight of choices made and secrets that refused to stay buried. The fires in the canyon had gone out, leaving only embers and silence, and yet every soul in the camp lay awake, eyes wide open beneath blankets and stars, listening for the echo of gunfire that might still return. Lisbeth sat with her knees drawn up to her chest beside the main fire pit, arms curled around the boy who had once belonged to no one and now wouldn't let go of her. Caleb's tiny hand gripped her skirt, his breath slow with sleep. Around them, the rescued girls whispered in small groups. Some wept, some polished old weapons. Others just watched the horizon dot, and across the fire sat the man who had saved her, the man who had not yet told her his name. He bled from two places. A slash across the ribs and a bullet grazed at the shoulder. But his eyes had not lost their clarity. And his knife rested casually across his lap, not for show but habit, the habit of someone who understood what the dark could bring. She broke the silence. You knew him. The Apache did not nod, did not speak. Malcolm. Still nothing. You knew what he was before I did. At last the warrior looked up. His gaze burned, not before. Lisbeth frowned. Then when? Before the twins were born. She blinked. He reached into the pouch at his side and withdrew something wrapped in deerskin. Slowly, deliberately, he unrolled the bundle. A string of blue beads shimmered in the firelight, knotted around a small silver pendant in the shape of a horse's head. Lisbeth gasped. That's mine. She reached out. He didn't give it to her. You gave it to a woman in the southern settlements, years ago. For safe passage, Lisbeth blinked. Memory returned in shards, riding with Malcolm through Apache, desperate to avoid a bounty posse. She had given that necklace to a woman who had offered them water, said it was all she had. That woman, the Apache said, was my sister. Lisbeth's chest went cold. She was killed, he continued. Days after, by a man wearing that pendant. Lisbeth opened her mouth, but no words came. The Apache stared through the flames. She trusted the wrong person. It wasn't me. I know. He held up the necklace, then tossed it into the fire. The silver sparked and hissed. Why didn't you tell me? He finally looked at her. Because vengeance blinds, and I needed to see. She swallowed hard. So you followed me? I watched. Because of him. Because of you. Her voice cracked. You were supposed to kill me. He shook his head. I was supposed to decide. A long silence. The wind curled around the camp. What's your name? She asked. He looked toward the mountains. Chaska. The word felt heavy, sacred. It means star-born. She repeated it softly. Chaska. He closed his eyes. I had a name once, she said. A different one. Before Malcolm. Before this. He opened his eyes. What was it? She hesitated. Eliza Baird. A long silence. You don't use it anymore. I buried her. Chaska nodded slowly. Then maybe tonight we both dug up ghosts. He rose slowly, the motion pained. Malcolm will return, with more. She nodded. I know. You can still run. She stared into the embers. Not anymore. He turned to walk away, but she reached for his hand. He paused. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once, then vanished into the dark. The next morning began with strategy. The Hogan matron, her warriors, the freed girls, Chaska and Lisbeth, gathered around a large flat stone where she had sketched the layout of the valley and its passes using a charred stick. He won't come at us again with brute force, Lisbeth said. He'll use the terrain, cut off water, force us to move. The matron pointed to the northern cliff. He's hired scouts from Bitterroot. They know these ridges. We blocked the high pass, Chaska said. Use deadfall, booby traps. A teenage girl named Talia stood. I can ride. South slope. Find traders. Maybe allies. Lisbeth looked at her. The girl was no older than 15, but already had the hardened eyes of someone who had survived too much. Take 2 others, she said, and ride wide. Don't come back until you have eyes behind you. The girl nodded and vanished. By noon, they had set snares along the lower trails, buried blades in brush, and moved the youngest children into a hidden cave network. Lisbeth stood atop a stone outcrop, watching the valley floor. She had never led anyone before. Now she led 42 lives. Chaska approached. You should rest. I can't. The storm will wait. He won't. Chaska hesitated, then handed her something wrapped in oiled cloth. A tomahawk. I made it for her, he said. Your sister. He nodded. Lisbeth closed her hand around the grip. She deserves more than memory. She has it, Chaska said, in you. That night, Malcolm sent a messenger, a boy, barefoot, eyes wide. He carried a satchel with a single note inside. Lisbeth read it aloud. Come alone. Midnight. The dry basin. Or I take the rest. The matron shook her head. It's a trap, of course, Lisbeth said. Then we don't go. Lisbeth stared at the letter. No, I go. Chaska stepped beside her. Not alone, she turned to him. I have to be, that's the bait. He held her gaze. Not alone, she smiled. Then stay in the shadows. The dry basin was an old riverbed now cracked with drought. Bones of bison littered the banks. Ghosts of rain danced in the distant sky but never fell. Lisbeth rode in at midnight. The moon was a sickle. Malcolm waited by a half-buried wagon. Hello. Again, he said. She dismounted slowly. What do you want? The twins, she stared. They're mine. You left them. I made them. Chaska's hand tightened around his bow in the rocks above. You came to take them? Malcolm smiled. No, I came to offer a trade. He whistled. A girl was dragged into view. Blood on her forehead. I found your scout, he said. She's fast, loyal, would die for you. He drew his gun. But you have to. Choose, give me the boys, or she dies. Lisbeth shook. Why them? Because they're my legacy. No, they're mine. Malcolm cocked the gun, then dropped to one knee, a feathered shaft buried in his shoulder. He screamed. Talia bit her captor. Another arrow flew. Then the rocks exploded with war cries. Chaska charged. Lisbeth drew her tomahawk. The basin lit with fire. An hour later, it was done. Talia was safe. Malcolm was gone. And Lisbeth stood above the dry river, staring at a necklace she had found in the dust. Silver. Horse head. The one she thought lost. Behind her, Chaska spoke. He won't stop, she nodded. Then neither will I. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Cliffhanger. As dawn rose, a cloud of dust appeared on the eastern rim and a rider carrying the U.S. Army standard. But the uniform he wore did not match any regiment Lisbeth had seen before, and the papers he carried bore her name. The rider came alone, trailing no dust but his own shadow. He crested the ridge on a dappled Mustang, the animal sweating despite the morning chill. A military standard flapped loosely from a lance lashed to his saddle, a tattered U.S. Army pennant. Crimson faded to rust, stitched with a symbol none in the camp recognized. Not infantry, not cavalry. Something else. Lisbeth stood at the center of the basin, sun behind her, hand on the tomahawk Chaska had gifted. Around her, the rescued girls fell silent, weapons set aside. The Hogan matron stepped forward, lips pressed to a line. Chaska crouched beside a fire pit, bow across his lap, eyes locked on the stranger's every move. The rider came down slow, methodical. His boots touched the earth like a man not in a hurry, but not out of caution either. He wore a lieutenant's coat with no rank, brass buttons dulled with dust. His hat was cocked forward to hide his eyes. But when he dismounted, the horse shifted like it missed his weight already. He walked to the edge of the firelight, held out a folded sheaf. Orders, he said. The voice was steady, dry, like paper catching flame. Lisbeth didn't move. Chaska rose, took the papers instead, his knife flicking briefly through the twine binding. He handed them to her. She opened them slowly. Scrawled in firm handwriting was a single sentence. Elizabeth Caldwell, you are hereby summoned to the Territory Tribunal to answer charges related to the destruction of Fort Amory and the unlawful release of bonded property. Below it, summons is backed by executive order under the war powers of the state of Franklin. Her heart skipped. Franklin? She asked. The rider finally lifted his eyes. They were pale, cloud gray, unreadable. The war never ended. It just read through its lines. Chaska stepped forward. She saved children. She burned a federal outpost, the man replied. Lisbeth scanned the rest. A signature, a wax seal, a transport order, a trial date, 3 days. Who sent you? She asked. He looked at her. Then to Chaska. Then to the Hogan matron. Finally back to her. Your father. Silence fell like ash. Lisbeth stared. My father's dead. Not anymore. Chaska's hand went to his blade. Lisbeth shook her head. Who are you really? He removed his hat. Captain Eli Braxton. Loyalist 3rd. Formerly of the Knoxville Front. The name meant nothing, but the eyes. She had seen them once in a mirror long ago. On a man with a medal and a ruined voice who had turned his back when she chose Malcolm. My father died in Gettysburg, she said. Only the man you remember. He turned, walked to his horse, pulled something from the saddlebag, tossed it at her feet. A letter, sealed in wax. Unbroken. She bent and picked it up. The wax bore an eagle. Its wings cracked with age. Inside, asterisk, asterisk, dearest Eliza, if this reaches you, I am already years late in writing. I watched you vanish into the desert and told myself you'd come back. You didn't. That was my first punishment. The second was learning you had sons, and that they were left behind. You think I didn't care? That I turned my back? But men like me, we were raised to believe silence was strength, that absence was discipline. I was wrong. So very wrong. I joined the Franklin Loyalists to find you, to clean up what Malcolm dirtied. I've broken every code I once upheld to pave the road you now walk. I couldn't be the father you needed, but I can be the judge who gives you the only thing you were ever owed. Truth. Come to me. There's more than one trial ahead, with all my failures. A B asterisk asterisk. She lowered the letter slowly. When she looked up, Braxton was already in the saddle. 3 days, he said. At Fort Ledger. Then he rode off. Chaska came to her side. Who is he? My father's ghost, she whispered. The matron stepped beside her. You don't have to go. I do. Why? Because ghosts don't rest. And I'm tired of being haunted. By noon they were packed. Chaska rode beside her. The twins sat in the wagon, quiet. Caleb hummed softly. They rode through country too dry for flowers. Dead oaks stood like bones. The trail narrowed until it kissed the edge of cliffs. Each night they made camp near water. Each night, Lisbeth dreamed of judges and chains. Of faces she couldn't name. On the second morning, they saw smoke. Not one column. 5. Chaska single quotes. His eyes darkened. Scouts. Yours? He shook his head. They crested a ridge, and below a burned caravan. Bodies. A red sash caught in a mesquite branch. The Franklin militia, Chaska muttered. He pointed to hoofprints. They were fresh. And too many. An army? She asked. Or worse. They rode hard. By dusk, they reached the final rise before Fort Ledger. It was no fort. It was a stone cathedral atop a bluff. Half ruined, half rebuilt. Its bell tower bore the star and bar. Its gate was iron. They were expected. Braxton met them on foot. Alone. He nodded at Lisbeth. Chaska dismounted but did not approach. Braxton raised a hand. To him too. What? He's named. For what? Rebellion. Chaska's eyes narrowed. Braxton looked at Lisbeth. I tried to change the wording. They wouldn't allow it. She stepped closer. You said you wanted truth. I did, and you lied. No. He looked at Chaska. I said I would judge. I never said I wouldn't bleed for it. He opened the gates. Inside, pews converted to holding cells. Candles burning like mourners. On a dais stood a single chair, and behind it, a woman, dressed in Union blue, general stars on her collar. Lisbeth froze. Mother? The woman nodded. Double quotes. Hello, Eliza. Cliffhanger. And with that greeting, Lisbeth realized her trial was never about judgment. It was about inheritance. And everyone in the fort had a different plan for what she should inherit next. The wind that swept through Fort Ledger wasn't the kind that stirred dust or carried whispers. It was the kind that stripped you clean, down to the bone, and dared you to stand there. Lisbeth Caldwell stood there. The doors of the stone cathedral had grown shut behind her, sealing out the desert and every choice she'd made beyond its crumbling walls. Ahead, candles guttered on iron sconces, casting shifting shadows across the pews and makeshift benches. A scarred flag hung limp over the dais. The woman beneath it, her mother, was even more statuesque than memory allowed. General Josephine. Bared. White hair braided tight and tucked under a campaign hat. Wrinkles like blade cuts at the corners of her mouth. She wore her war-like armor, and the brass on her collar didn't gleam. It threatened. Hello, Eliza, she said again. Lisbeth's feet didn't move. Chaska stepped in beside her, body half turned. To shield, the twins were behind them with the Hogan matron, who hadn't asked permission to come. Caleb peeked around her cloak. General Baird's eyes flicked to the children. No softening, you brought the whole circus. Lisbeth finally spoke. I didn't come for your approval. Good, the general said. Because I didn't offer it. The silence was brittle. What is this? Lisbeth asked. A tribunal? A reunion? A trap? The general's voice was a blade drawn slowly. That depends on how you answer. Braxton, still on the threshold, spoke quietly. She came in good faith, Mother. You should have stayed dead, the general snapped. He stiffened. Chaska stepped forward. But Lisbeth raised a hand. Why now? She asked. Why summon me? After all these years? General Baird descended the dais steps one at a time. Because the map has changed. The territories are breaking. Cities are going dark. The East is calling for a union. And those who remain independent, they need symbols. I'm not a symbol. You're the last daughter of Enoch Baird, and you burned Fort Amory. You humiliated the Franklin Command and embarrassed your bloodline in front of the entire frontier. Lisbeth raised her chin. And saved 42 girls. The general ignored that. And now, she continued, you'll answer for it. A door opened to the left. 2 officers stepped in. Each carried a red leather folio. One bore Lisbeth's name. The other, Chaska's. You're both named in this trial, the general said. But your fates are separate. Chaska didn't flinch. What do you want from us? Lisbeth asked. For you to accept your legacy. She almost laughed. I gave that up. The general raised an eyebrow. Then your children will inherit it. Lisbeth went cold. You can't mean that. This fort, General Baird said, gesturing to the stone walls, was built to outlast empires. You can either lead what comes next or be buried beneath it. Braxton stepped forward. Mother, that wasn't the agreement. You never understood war, Eli. Chaska's voice was low, and you never understood mercy. The general turned her gaze on him. Apache blood, trained by shadows. You think you understand justice? He met her stare. I understand survival. Then you'll understand what happens next. Another door opened. 6 figures entered. Men and women in military coats of various origin. Some bore Union insignias, some Confederate. Some wore no colors at all. The tribunal, the general said. One voice from each fractured region. We vote tonight. Lisbeth's voice was steel. Vote on what? Whether you're executed, imprisoned, or offered command. She blinked. What? The general moved closer. We need a leader who can rally civilians. Someone who inspires the broken. You, girl, whether you know it or not, have become a fire the desperate gather around. I didn't ask for that. Neither did I, but I burned half of Virginia to win my seat. You only had to survive. Lisbeth looked at the tribunal. What happens if I refuse? A tall man in gray spoke. Then the war continues, without your name, without your shield. Lisbeth looked at Chaska. What would you do? He didn't answer, but his fingers brushed hers. The general saw it. He can't come with you, she said. Why not? Because we can't have questions about bloodlines. You mean about love? The general's face twisted. Lisbeth drew a breath. Then here's my answer. She stepped onto the dais, faced the tribunal, and dropped the tomahawk at their feet. I will not be a tool. Not for armies, not for bloodlines. Not for ghosts. A hush fell. The woman from the Kansas territories spoke. Then what will you be? Free. A long pause. Braxton nodded slowly. Chaska stepped forward. She saved me, and I'll follow her. Lisbeth looked at the twins, then at Caleb. I was left behind. Once, she said. And I raised sons in a world that only takes. If you want war, build it yourself. We're building something else. The general stared. You'll be hunted. I always was. Another silence. Then the old man from Texas stood. Let her go. She'd do more in the open than locked in this tomb. One by one, the others nodded. The general's face didn't change, but she turned. You have 3 days' ride before the warrant returns. Use them. Lisbeth nodded. Chaska handed her the tomahawk. Braxton followed them out. At the gate, he stopped. I'll cover your exit. She looked at him. Why? Because father never stopped watching the ridge. And you brought the sunrise with you. He handed her a compass, northwest, through the canyon. Trust no flags. Then he vanished into the fort. They rode hard, 3 days into the wasteland. Each night, another star fell. By the end of the 3rd day, they reached a riverbank no map marked. A place untouched, no settlements. No gunfire. Just wind. Chaska built the fire. Lisbeth held her sons, the girls who had followed them, sang a soft song, and when Caleb asked where they were going next, she pointed west. To build a place where no one gets left behind. Cliffhanger. But as they crossed the river, the next morning, a coded note floated down the current sealed with the same eagle wax Lisbeth thought she'd left behind. The river was shallow but fast, churning with early spring melt from far-off ranges Lisbeth had only seen on maps. It ran like veins cut through stone, fierce and glacial, marking the western edge of what old maps had once called Apache territory, but now no one called it anything. Out here, land had no name. Only memories. Chaska helped her across with one of the twins slung in a wrap across her chest and the other clutched to her shoulder. Caleb held tight to the Hogan matron's hand, boots slipping on the pebbled bottom. The rescued girls crossed 2 by 2, silent but sure-footed now. No longer the trembling hostages they'd once been. They were halfway through when Lisbeth saw it, a pale shape bobbing along the current. Not natural, not debris. She angled toward it, heart already thudding, snagged on a submerged rock. A glass vial, stoppered. Inside, a folded piece of parchment. She plucked it from the current and held it up to the gray light. The seal was unmistakable. An eagle, wings outstretched, head bowed. Her father's seal. Chaska stepped beside her. His body shifted, alert. It's a message, she whispered. A warning, he countered. She broke the seal, unrolled the paper. Inside were 2 lines. They're coming. From the north. The ink is already drying on your betrayal. Don't trust the woman who bears your eyes. She stared. Chaska took the message, read it, frowned. Your mother? Maybe, or someone else. What does it mean? Ink is already drying? She swallowed. They forged something, maybe orders, maybe identity, maybe me. The matron spoke from the bank. We should move, Lisbeth nodded. We head west faster. For the next 4 days they pushed into a stretch of land so empty it felt unbirthed. Red plateaus gave way to white cliffs. Salt beds shimmered under sun. At night the sky opened like a wound, stars scattered like old bones. They didn't speak much. Chaska ranged far ahead during the day, returning with news of prints, small camps, signs of old movement. Never close, but never absent. The twins started to babble. Caleb began teaching the youngest girls how to make traps from twine and stone. Lisbeth dreamed of faces hers, but not hers signing papers, stepping onto porches, speaking to crowds, and above all, whispering lies in her voice. On the 5th day, they reached a ridge above a dry lake bed. The cracked earth stretched for miles, and at its center, an outpost. New. Unmarked. Chaska passed her his scope. She peered through. A woman in a blue coat stood on a platform, shouting orders. Her hair was pinned like Lisbeth's, her boots identical. She was reading from a scroll. The crowd, migrants, wanderers, deserters, listened with rapt faces. Then she stepped down. And turned. Lisbeth's blood ran cold. It was her, but it wasn't. The woman bore her face, almost exactly. Chaska muttered, "It's a forgery." "No," Lisbeth said. "It's worse." The matron stepped forward. "A mimic?" Lisbeth nodded. They've built a version of me. One they can control. Caleb, watching through narrowed eyes, whispered, "She doesn't smile the same." That night, Lisbeth crept down alone. Chaska protested. The matron forbade. But she went. She wrapped her hair up, tucked her coat tight, disguised herself not as anyone else, but as the past version of herself. A wandering girl, she slipped into the camp near dusk. Campfires, tents, cookpots, voices murmured about Commander Caldwell and the march west. Lisbeth's gut clenched. She edged toward the main tent. Listen. The fake Caldwell was inside, speaking to a man with a Carolina drawl. Maps lay spread on a crate. A route marked in red. "We move in 3 days," the imposter said. "To the trading post. We make it the capital." "Won't that draw the real ones?" "That's the point," she said. "We kill the myth at its birthplace." Lisbeth stepped back and froze, a hand on her shoulder. She turned. It was a girl, maybe 16, dirty but kind-eyed. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Lisbeth nodded. "I know. They hang spies." "Are you loyal to her?" The girl hesitated. "I don't know who she is. But she talks good." "That's not always truth. Then what is?" Lisbeth looked her dead in the eye. "The scars you carry, not the stories they tell about them." The girl blinked. Then turned. "Follow me." She led Lisbeth out through the back of camp. Past wagons, past a pile of forged documents. One of them bore her signature. She snatched it. The girl looked scared. "You're her, aren't you? The real one?" Lisbeth didn't answer, but the girl stepped aside. "Go, before they see." Lisbeth didn't sleep that night. She spread the forged document in the firealight. It was an order, signed in her name. It read, "By command of Eliza Caldwell, any who oppose the new territory union shall be considered hostile and purged." She whispered, "They're starting a war." Chaska said, "In your name." Caleb, from beside the matron, asked quietly, "What do we do?" Lisbeth stood. "We go back. To the post. To where this started. We bring the real story." The matron nodded. "You'll be hunted. We already are. But this time we ride into it." The next morning, they turned east. Back across the cracked lake. Back into danger. The twin imposters would meet. Only one would live to tell the story. Cliffhanger, at the base of Red Mesa. Just before dawn, 2 women faced each other in silence. One with truth in her eyes, one with a weapon in her sleeve. The handwriting was hers, not a close match, not an imitation. It was hers, but Lisbeth Caldwell hadn't signed anything in weeks. Far beneath the western cliffs of New Mexico, in a bunker carved into what old maps labeled as Apache holy ground, General Josephine Baird stood over a slab of sandstone that served as her command desk. Beside her lay 2 sealed documents. One bore Lisbeth's signature, the other the name Caleb Caldwell. The general didn't blink. She'd stared down cannon fire and the collapse of 5 governments. Paper couldn't rattle her, but blood could. She pressed a palm flat to the folder. Behind her, Braxton stood silent. "She won," he said at last. "She survived," the general corrected. "That's not the same. It was. Once." She turned, eyes like flint. "There's more at stake than pride." Braxton didn't argue, but his jaw clenched. "You used her name again. You signed orders in it. And do you see a firing squad at the gate?" He stared at the second file. "What's the plan?" "2 fronts," the general said. "A new force from the north carrying her name, and from the east, something they'll never expect." Braxton opened the second file. It was blank inside. Only a single item lay folded in the center. A child's drawing. 2 stick figures. One labeled Mom, one Caleb, both crossed out in red. Back at Red Mesa, the dawn came with fire in the sky and frost on the ground. Spring had not yet won the land, but the air smelled like growing things. Lisbeth held both twins close as she looked. Out across the rebuilt post, tents had been replaced by timber, fires by ovens, refugees by families, the girls she had rescued now taught others to write. Caleb was learning to ride under Chaska's watchful eye. The matron had set up a medicine hut, and every week more came. Not for orders, for belonging. That morning, 2 scouts arrived. One carried a white ribbon, the other a name: Colonel Keating. Of the Eastern March requests parley with Commander Caldwell. Lisbeth raised an eyebrow. Chaska muttered, "You're a commander now?" "I didn't give myself that name." "Then it means something." They met on the edge of a salt plain. Keating came alone. No guards, no weapons. Just the bearing of a man who'd once commanded legions and now walked because horses betrayed him. He removed his hat. "Ma'am," Lisbeth inclined her head. "Colonel." He reached into his coat. Slow. Withdrawn. A single page. "This was distributed last week across the northern towns." Lisbeth took it. Her name, her face. A proclamation. All free settlers wishing to join. The new territory union must swear allegiance to the one true Caldwell. She lowered the page. The imposter again. Keating shook his head. "No, that one's in chains. This is something else." He pulled a second paper. This time, a photo. Lisbeth stared. It was her, holding Caleb. She had never posed for this photo. Chaska swore. The colonel continued, "They've weaponized your image. Beyond what you can control. Towns have burned in your name. Forts have fallen, and somewhere someone is writing history." Lisbeth looked at Chaska. "We have to move." "Where?" She pointed to the map. "Santa Justine." Keating nodded. "That's where the printing press is. And the voice that's pretending to be you broadcasts nightly." They left at dusk. 10 riders. Lisbeth, Chaska, Keating, and 7 others, each with their own reason to fight. They rode under no flag. No name. Just purpose. Caleb stayed with the matron. So did the twins. "I'll come back," she whispered. "You always do," the boy replied. The ride to Santa Justine was a graveyard of ghosts. Town after town bore murals of Lisbeth's face. Quotes she'd never spoken. Orders she'd never given. One burned town had a plaque. "We died for the Union," she promised. Chaska said nothing, but his fists never unclenched. They reached the city on the 4th night. Smoke curled from its chimneys. The printing press stood at the center, but not guarded. Worship. A woman stood atop it each evening and read new edicts. Her face wore a porcelain mask shaped like Lisbeth's. The people cheered. The riders watched from a rooftop. "We can't kill her," Keating said. "That would martyr her." Lisbeth nodded. "We expose her." That night, they broke in. Silent. Swift. Inside. The press printed not just papers, but forged letters, scripts, orders. And beneath it all, in a vault, recordings. One played on loop. "I am Lisbeth Caldwell. You will obey." Lisbeth whispered. "That's not my voice." "It's close enough," Chaska said. "But no soul." They took the recordings, the scripts. And when the masked speaker ascended the platform the next morning, Lisbeth stepped up beside her. The crowd gasped. 2 Caldwells. 1 masked. 1 real. Lisbeth raised a hand. "You've heard her. Now hear me." The crowd quieted. She held up the forged order. "These are lies." Then she showed the drawing Caleb had made. "This is truth." She pulled off the mask. The woman underneath was pale, scared, anonymous. Lisbeth handed her the microphone. "Say who you are." The woman hesitated. Then, "I'm nobody. They paid me. They made me." The crowd murmured. Lisbeth turned. "You want a leader. I want a home. I won't rule. But I'll walk with you." Then she stepped down. And began walking. People followed, not because they were told, but because they chose. Back at the printing press, Chaska found one last file. He handed it to her. Inside, a list of names. Each marked potential Caldwell clone. Lisbeth stared. At the bottom, Live subject Caleb, DNA confirmed. Prepare phase 2. Her heart stopped. Cliffhanger. At Red Mesa, the matron looks up as soldiers in unmarked gray descend the ridge. And at their front, a boy wearing Caleb's face butt. Eyes that do not blink. The sky above Red Mesa cracked open like parchment scorched by a campfire. Clouds drifted in slow, ominous shapes, as if they too were watching what now gathered below. The matron stood at the edge of the ridge, her shawl snapping in the rising wind, her hand pressed flat against the boy's chest. He looked like Caleb. Every freckle, every cowlick, even the tiny scar above his right brow, where Caleb had once fallen off a pony cart, but his eyes were void. Gray. UNBL. ING. No fear. No confusion. Just calculation. Behind him marched 20 soldiers in unmarked gray. Uniforms pressed, rifles slung. Not militia, not drifters. Organized, trained. The boy stepped forward. "You are holding subjects belonging to the Territory Custodial Armory," he said. The matron did not flinch. "These children are free. By order. 12FC313. Any organic derivative of class A gene print must be surrendered." She gripped her medicine pouch. Behind her, the girls who'd once followed Lisbeth now formed a wall. The older ones held farm tools. One had a flare gun. Another, a cooking cleaver. The boy's voice did not change. "We have authorization to retrieve or eliminate." The matron said quietly, "You are not Caleb." The clone tilted his head. "No, Caleb was flawed." "Then you've made the same mistake again." She pulled a copper bead from her pouch. The earth trembled, and from the brush rose Chaska. He moved like smoke low, fast, blade flashing in a blur. The first 2 soldiers didn't even fire. They just collapsed. The others scattered. But from the trading post came a new sound. HOOFBEATS. And at their front, Lisbeth. Her return was not quiet. It was fire. Behind her rode 30 volunteers. The sky above Red Mesa cracked open like parchment scorched by a campfire. Clouds drifted in slow, ominous shapes, as if they too were watching what now gathered below. The matron stood at the edge of the ridge, her shawl snapping in the rising wind, her hand pressed flat against the boy's chest. He looked like Caleb. Every freckle, every cowlick, even the tiny scar above his right brow, where Caleb had once fallen off a pony cart, but his eyes were void. Gray. UNBL. ING. No fear. No confusion. Just calculation. Behind him marched 20 soldiers in unmarked gray. Uniforms pressed, rifles slung. Not militia, not drifters. Organized, trained. The boy stepped forward. "You are holding subjects belonging to the Territory Custodial Armory," he said. The matron did not flinch. "These children are free. By order. 12FC313. Any organic derivative of class A gene print must be surrendered." She gripped her medicine pouch. Behind her, the girls who'd once followed Lisbeth now formed a wall. The older ones held farm tools. One had a flare gun. Another, a cooking cleaver. The boy's voice did not change. "We have authorization to retrieve or eliminate." The matron said quietly, "You are not Caleb." The clone tilted his head. "No, Caleb was flawed." "Then you've made the same mistake again." She pulled a copper bead from her pouch. The earth trembled, and from the brush rose Chaska. He moved like smoke low, fast, blade flashing in a blur. The first 2 soldiers didn't even fire. They just collapsed. The others scattered. But from the trading post came a new sound. HOOFBEATS. And at their front, Lisbeth. Her return was not quiet. It was fire. Behind her rode 30 volunteers, former deserters, outlaws, preachers with pistols, and wives who'd buried too many. She didn't call orders. She just led. Straight through the gray line. The clone looked up. And for the first time hesitated. Lisbeth. Didn't aim for him. She aimed for the command pack slung at his back. One shot. The device exploded. Static shrieked from within. The boy screamed not from pain but from glitch. His voice looped. Caleb. Caleb. DNA. Authority. He dropped. Lisbeth Dismount. Stood over him. Chaska joined her. The matron approached last. He's a vessel. Who made him? Lisbeth whispered. Chaska held up the shattered pack. Inside, a seal. General Baird. They buried the clone far from the ridge. No cross. No name. Lisbeth spent the night awake, watching the twins. One stirred, whispered, Mama? She held him tighter. In the morning, they prepared to leave again. General Baird was not hiding anymore. From a granite stronghold marked only on maps as Black Vault Echo, she sent a message by balloon, signed in Lisbeth's hand. Red Mesa must be neutralized. It dropped into the hands of a governor 6 towns east. By sunset, militias were mobilizing, not to capture. To erase. Lisbeth knew it was coming. They had a week. Less. She gathered her circle. We won't run. Not again, said Chaska. We stay. We broadcast. We show them truth. They rewired the printing press, connected it to a scavenged transmitter. Caleb read the first message. My name is Caleb Caldwell. I am not a clone. Red Mesa's soil turned red again, but not from war, from fire. The first shots came before sunrise. Not from the ridge or the brush, from above. The sky split open with silent gliders, black wind, engine free, carrying figures with no faces. Drones rained propaganda before bullets. Leaflets marked with Lisbeth's face and the words, Surrender to yourself. The real Lisbeth stood atop the water tower, wind lashing her coat. The flare of her lantern catching the RIDG, Eli, and E. Below her. Volunteers scrambled, some to defend, some to protect, some just to stand. With her, they weren't trained, but they believed. First wave was psychological. Projected voices in Lisbeth's exact tone urged the camp to surrender. Drones beamed her face smiling, cold, unreal onto every available surface. I am Lisbeth, you are mine. Children screamed. Mothers hid. Caleb covered his ears and whispered, That's not her. That's not her. The matron held him. I know. Child, so do the rest now. Then came the soldiers, not many, just enough to test them. They moved with eerie synchronization. Not charging. Measuring. And behind them, on horseback, rode the one they called the last Caldwell. A clone perfected, gray coat, steel eyes, weapon in each hand. She didn't speak. She broadcasted. Her voice entered every receiver, every line of copper, every mind. She is obsolete. I am evolution. I bleed only by design. The real Lisbeth stepped forward. Then why are you afraid? To face me without a mask? The clone Dismount. And walked toward the post, toward herself, toward the truth. Chaska met her halfway. Stop, he said. She tilted her head. You can't protect her. I'm not. I'm protecting you. The clone blinked. And for the first time hesitated. That was enough. From the rooftops, flare guns fired. From the ground, nets sprang up. And from within the press tent, the real Lisbeth activated the feedback device, a crude box built from stolen drone parts. It broadcasted her heartbeat. Not voice. Image. Just the rhythm of something real. The clone staggered. Error. She whispered. She turned and ran, but it wasn't over. New enemy advanced from the east. Mercenaries, promised land and blood. General Baird's final play. Lisbeth knew. They couldn't win head on. So she called the only one who'd never lied. A writer left that night with a sealed letter. To someone no one trusted. Braxton. He found her at dawn. Alone. Rifle slung. She didn't. Ask how he got there. Only, did you bring it? He held out the code book, stolen from Baird's vault. You'll need more than words, she nodded. I have something better. She walked to the edge of camp, faced the army. Raised the codebook, and read aloud word by word every secret they'd buried. Every lie, every forged order, every clone document, every command to kill children in her name. Then she burned it. The soldiers hesitated, one by one. They stepped back, until only the clone remained. And this time, she didn't speak. She looked at Lisbeth. And whispered, I was made to kill you. Lisbeth nodded, then died trying. They fought. No armies, just two women, one born, one made. They bled. They fell. They rose again. And in the end, Lisbeth pinned the clone to the ground. Any last words? She asked. The clone stared. Then reached into her coat, pulled a photo. Lisbeth took it. It was her. And Caleb. And the clone as a child. All three. In front of the same homestead. We were never given names, the clone whispered, then died. Lisbeth buried her beside the trading post. No cross. Just a stone. It read, not born, not fake. Just lost. General Baird vanished. Some say she died in the vault. Others say she fled east. Lisbeth never looked for her. There were better things to build. Caleb turned 12. Chaska took him hunting. The matron opened a school, and Lisbeth? She planted flowers. Each color for a name she wanted to remember, including one she never got to give. The clone's real name, whatever it could have been. But far beyond the canyons, in a city rebuilt with glass and steel, a signal flickered to life. A voice whispered. This was only phase 1. Red Mesa had tasted fire and come through it, flowering. The trading post's fences had been rebuilt with wagon wheels and welded signs. The gardens bloomed year-round now, fed by underground springs unearthed during the siege. Lisbeth stood on the rise overlooking the fields, fingers stained with tulip pollen, her eyes scanning the horizon not for threat, but for arrival. She expected mail, a visitor. Perhaps a wandering girl looking for shelter or a former enemy ready to unlearn the war. She did not expect the sky to split again, but it did. It started with the wind. No storm. No dust, just a pressure change. Then, the light. A beam sharp silent pierced the sky at a 60-degree angle. It came not from above, but across the land from the northeast. Through it flickered a ripple of distorted air. Like heat over metal. But this heat walked. The boy who found her was not Caleb. He was older, taller, skin mottled like a map of every territory border. His eyes didn't blink, but they didn't frighten her. He was breathing hard, and in his hands he carried something wrapped in linen. Lisbeth dropped her trowel. Where did you get that? He held out the bundle. Inside was a transmitter coil, cracked, burned, marked with a military serial. And attached to it, a dog tag. It read, Lisbeth Caldwell V9. Chaska found her hours later, staring at the open coil. We buried her, he said. Lisbeth didn't look up. Then this one wasn't her. She showed him the tag. He read it. Blinked once, twice. Then, V doesn't stand for version. She turned. What then? Vault. Back in the ruins of Vault Echo, deep beneath the canyons, a chamber long believed empty flickered to life. Inside, tanks pulsed. Not one. Not 10. Thousands. Each marked with initials. None had faces, but all had her voice. Braxton arrived with a convoy of salvage skimmers. He handed her a ledger, recovered from Baird's last data node. She had plans for long-term imprint replication, each clone not just a soldier. A story, a history. Lisbeth scanned the pages. Fictional campaigns, battles she never fought, children she never raised. One page showed her standing before a capital city, banners waving behind her. The Empress of the Second Union. These weren't weapons, she whispered. They were replacements. She called a gathering, not just at Red Mesa. Everywhere. Her voice rang through old towers. Recycled antennae whispered into forgotten radios buried in barns. I am Lisbeth Caldwell. You may know my name. You may have followed someone wearing my face, but I am not your ruler. I am not your savior. I am not a ghost. I am real. I remember every lie they told. And I need you to remember one truth. We do not belong to stories. We did not write. The people came from fire-scarred towns, from cliffside shelters, from salt caravans and highland spires. They brought relics, forged photos, uniforms labeled with her name, each one burned in the basin. Below the mesa, not to destroy history, to reclaim. Caleb lit the first torch, the twins lit the second, and then the fires spread, a pyre for every stolen truth. But peace was not the end, not yet, for beyond the eastern scar, in a vault beneath a mountain called Mirror Root, a voice activated. It did not speak in commands. It told a story of a world where Lisbeth Caldwell united 1,000 fractured settlements, of a war she ended with nothing but her voice, and of a child she raised called Alpha. The voice was soft, soothing, designed to comfort, and it was downloaded into 100 new vessels, not soldiers, teachers, each bearing her name. Lisbeth learned of this not from scouts, but from a child, a girl, age 6, who walked into Red Mesa, alone, holding a slate board with chalk words. Hello, I am Caldwell. I want to learn. Chaska read it, froze. Lisbeth knelt. Who taught you that name? The girl tapped her chest. My heart says it. Who gave you your heart? The girl pointed east, toward Mirror Root. The final chapter was not a war. It was a choice. To destroy every last clone, or rewrite them. Lisbeth stood before the council. She had never asked to form survivors, historians, builders, daughters, enemies turned caretakers. She said, if I erase them all, I become what Baird wanted me to be. A symbol with no reflection. But if I teach them, if I let them find their own names, then maybe we become more than stories. No one objected. 10 years later, at the foot of Red Mesa, a school opened. Its sign read, Welcome Storytellers. Inside, 100 children gathered, some born, some made, all learning who they really were. On the last page of the last book ever printed at the old Santa Justine Press, a single note was handwritten. The real ones bleed, but they also bloom. Caldwell series complete. She gave birth in a corn crib alone, until Midnight Riders formed the Circle of Fire. If you'd like thumbnail prompts, a title recap, or another story in this genre, just say the word. Part FIFTN, the child named Aurora, didn't cry when she woke. She blinked once. Then again, light streamed through lattice vents in the stone ceiling. It painted the vault in angled shadows like bars across her vision. But she was not caged. Not anymore. Not like the others who came before her, others whose data still pulsed along fiber lines. Embedded in the floor, a soft chime sounded. She sat up. Her fingertips traced glyphs etched into her cot's frame. Caldwell Reserve Series. 14B. She didn't know what that meant, but her heart did. It beat the same rhythm as the one carried on old broadcasts. She remembered a voice distant but warm. You don't belong to stories you didn't write. She wanted to find whoever said that. And ask, can I write mine? Mirror Root was no longer guarded by soldiers. After the clone nets failed, the mountain lab became a dead zone, sealed, feared, forgotten. But its machinery hadn't stopped. Not fully. Something in its core still hummed. Talia found it first, 2 years after Red Mesa sent out its first school packs. She followed a forgotten tributary of the Snake River into land scorched during the last march. There she found a girl, building cairns from charred bones and stones, each one marked with symbols not from any known script. Talia dismounted. The girl didn't flee. She said, My name is Aurora. I was born yesterday, but I remember a war. Talia dismounted and whispered, So did I. Red Mesa received them under cloud-like. Aurora walked with poise beyond her years. Her eyes drank in the murals on the walls, the music in the gardens, the giggle of twins now old enough to braid each other's hair. Without instruction, Lisbeth watched from the steps. She saw something strange in Aurora. Not danger, not mimicry, but pause, the way a poet pauses before the final line. Braxton handed her a dossier. I checked the glyphs. She used her own system, not a clone imprint. Not a vault code, she invented it. Chaska added, she doesn't repeat. Not speech, not footsteps, she adapts. Faster than anything I've ever seen. Lisbeth stepped forward. Aurora. The girl turned. She smiled, but only with her eyes. I've been looking for you, she said. In the quiet between signals. Over weeks, Aurora became a part of Red Mesa, but not like the others. She learned without being taught. She never asked the same question twice. And when Caleb invited her to join the storytelling circle, she declined. I don't remember my first story, she said. I only know I'm here to finish one. The twins grew fascinated. They followed her through the fields, watched her trace equations into the earth, solve problems even the old engineers, COULDN, single quotes T. And one night, one of them asked, are you a machine? Aurora answered, I'm an idea someone tried to bury. But I kept growing. In the third year, a messenger arrived. A woman on foot, clothes torn, skin sun-seared, carrying a single sheet of paper protected in waxed leather. She collapsed in the square. Caleb caught her. Braxton read the note. His voice was grim. There's a resurgence. Not clones. Not soldiers, believers. They call themselves the voice of the true Caldwell. And they've taken the Santa Justine press. Lisbeth closed her eyes. Again. But Aurora spoke first. Not again. Differently. They're not using my face this time. They're using yours. She held up the transmission. It was Lisbeth's voice. Twisted, reverent, declaring laws she'd never written. The voice claimed to preserve her original truth. Chaska spat in the dust. There's no such thing. But Aurora said, they've built a canon. Based on fragments, letters, second-hand stories. A shrine made from echo. Lisbeth whispered, then we go to Santa Justine. They rode that night. Caleb, taller now, rode beside his mother. The twins stayed behind. Chaska led the forward scouts. Braxton handled the encryptions, and Aurora? She walked. No horse. Just pace, never slowing. Never panting. She walked the whole way. Santa Justine had changed. No longer a hushed town bowing to impostors. It was now a fortress of parchment. Walls lined with gospel pages, towers constructed from paper-matched statues of the Saint Caldwell. And in the center square, the press itself, converted into a pulpit. Atop it stood a woman, cloaked in red. Reading not from scripture, but from edited versions of Lisbeth's own journals. Caleb whispered, how'd they get those? Lisbeth answered, I published them, years ago, to make sure the truth lived. Aurora stepped forward. Truth, when edited, becomes power, and power hungers. The crowd noticed them. Someone shouted, heretic, another, imposter. Lisbeth raised her hands. I am Lisbeth Caldwell. The crowd gasped. But Aurora took the pulpit. She pulled a chip from her cloak, inserted it into the press console, and played the oldest surviving recording. Lisbeth's voice, cracked, honest. I do not want to be followed, only understood. If my name helps you survive, borrow it, but never build a cage with it. The silence that followed was total. The preacher in red lowered her head, removed her cloak, and laid it at Lisbeth's feet. I never knew, she whispered. Lisbeth nodded. Neither did I until I did. They stayed in Santa Justine that winter. Taught new caretakers how to unbind false scriptures. Aurora converted the press to a multi-voice archive, each story printed with author credits, sourcing, and contradiction space. The truth was no longer monologue. It was chorus. Back at Red Mesa, Aurora carved her own glyph into the schoolhouse door. It wasn't a letter. It was a spiral made from broken lines. No truth is whole, she said. But in the pattern of the cracks, we find something close. And Lisbeth, years older now, knelt beside her. You never wanted to be me. No, Aurora said. I wanted to meet you and decide for myself. Years later, when the final vault crumbled in the northern ice, Lisbeth stood on the rise above the garden where her children now raised children. No monuments. Just names carved into cottonwood. Each one a story that had not been edited. And beside her, Aurora said, Now, it's your turn to rest. Lisbeth looked to the stars. I think I will. And when she slept for the final time, her last thought was this: the world did not remember her. It remembered themselves. Because of her. And that was enough. Series extended. She gave birth in a corn crib alone until midnight riders formed a circle of fire. Part 15 complete. Let me know if you want Part 16, a spin-off with Aurora, or thumbnail prompts for the full saga. Part SIST in rain tapped the roof of the Red Mesa archives in quiet rhythm as Aurora opened the last sealed crate. Inside, wrapped in linen and cedar shavings, were the voice cylinders, labeled not in her mother's hand, but in someone older. Someone before Lisbeth. The crate had been found beneath the burned floor of the Santa Justine press, its wood marked with the crest of the pre-Union Scholarium, a circle enclosing a spiral sun. Aurora carefully lifted the top cylinder. Its label, ink faded but intact, read, Our Caldwin Incident Log 07, the Eden Failure. She didn't recognize the name, but the feel of it, the way it stuck to her spine, it meant this mattered. And whatever it held, it was older than truth, older than myth. Braxton arrived with 2 engineers and an ancient player. They set it up beneath the lanterns, gears clicking and wires sparking as the first cylinder spun. Static at first. Then a voice. This is Regent Caldwin of the 7th Eden Outpost. If you're hearing this, you've found what they buried. Good. That means something lived. Aurora leaned forward. The voice wasn't kind, but it was honest. They told us paradise could be printed, programmed, simulated until the errors burned off. They were wrong. Eden failed. Not because of climate or code but story. They gave us fiction to live by, and when it cracked, we had nothing. Chaska exhaled. She's talking about the original settlements, the mind labs, the Genesis bunkers. Aurora whispered, before the fires. Caleb stepped forward. Who was she to you? Aurora didn't answer. She was still listening. History will lie. It always does. So let this record say what others won't. I was not a hero. I enforced the fall. But I also planted something beneath the wreckage. A code. A child. A choice. If she's found this, then maybe the roots survived. The audio ended. Silence rang. Then Aurora whispered, She's not my ancestor. She's my beginning. In the days that followed, Aurora traced the cylinder's metadata. It held more than sound. Each log embedded with coordinates, dream archives, genetic markers, and a name kept recurring. Phase route. She sent Braxton, Talia northeast, to where the red canyons gave way to iron forest. There, beneath strata of fused glass and old steel, they found it, a vault door. Melted shut, overgrown. But not dead. Inside, a nursery, empty cribs, a library of sleep training tapes, and one functioning stasis pod long vacant. Aurora stepped into the center and knelt. On the wall, etched by hand, were words in ancient pidgin. To walk in truth is to outlive your own myth. She laid her hand to the glass, and a panel opened. Inside was a second name, a match to her own genome. Not Aurora, But Altair, back at Red Mesa, she didn't speak for days. She walked, not pacing. Not aimless. Processing. Chaska eventually found her in the upper orchard, pruning trees with bare hands, sap staining her fingertips like ink. Do you believe she programmed you? He asked. I believe she didn't finish me. And what will you do now? Aurora turned to him, eyes soft. I'll finish myself. That spring, she requested leave. Not to disappear. To map. I want to find where all the Caldwells went. The real ones, the forged ones, the ones who never came home. She took a copy of the Red Mesa archives, a walking press, and a solar field car retrofitted with voice sync. Caleb rode beside her. I'm not letting you go alone, he said. I'm not going alone, she replied. I'm going forward. Their journey passed through lost zones, places where magnetic fields still warped compasses, where time felt thick, where old stories hung like dust. They met descendants of vault refugees, tribes formed from failed experiments, cities grown from myth. And each place held echoes of Caldwell. Sometimes as legend, sometimes as threat, once as deity. Aurora never corrected them. She only listened. And then she asked, what do you remember? And she printed their answer. By year's end, she had mapped 33 enclaves, each with its own story, each differing from the Red Mesa truth, each true in its own right. Caleb turned to her, tired but smiling. How do we know which Caldwell was real? Aurora looked at the bound volumes. She smiled. All of them. Or none. That's not what matters. What does? That they kept telling, even when it hurt. When they returned to Red Mesa, it was midwinter. Frost crowned the tulips. Twins now taught in the schoolhouse. Braxton ran the archives, and Lisbeth's tree, planted above her resting place, bore fruit for the first time. Aurora placed the newest volume beneath its roots. The cover read, The Unfinished Caldwell. Inside, no chapters. Just voices. Just questions. Just beginnings. The next spring, Aurora gave a final lecture before setting off once more. She stood before students from 10 settlements. All bore different creeds. Some never knew war. Others had only known survival. Aurora said, the truth isn't what happened. It's what we choose to carry forward, so carry carefully. And carry kindly. Then she opened her journal. And added one more line. The real ones leave room. Then she walked into the rising sun. And her story was never finished, because it was never meant to be. Part SEVNTE. And the message came on the wind. A child arrived at Red Mesa with no name, no shoes, and one sentence etched into a medallion on a leather cord. I have seen the other sun. Braxton brought him to the orchard where Aurora was teaching cartography to 3 scholars from the glacial enclaves. The boy stood silent while rain kissed the petals of Lisbeth's tree. He was shaking, but not from fear, from something older. Aurora knelt beside him. Where did you see it? He looked. Up. It rose in the north. The phrase other sun appeared only once in the Red Mesa archives, a speculative essay from the Caldwell cylinders. Something about a failed orbital array intended to extend daylight to remote settlements, but ultimately abandoned. Its final transmission, decades old, was a warning. Sovereign light must never be automated. Aurora closed the file. Chaska said, even if it was real, it shouldn't still be in orbit. Braxton nodded. And if it isn't in orbit, then it's moving. They assembled an expedition. Aurora, Caleb, 2 Maprites. A former clone who had renounced all false doctrine and lived. Now as a silent scribe named Elm. The child led them north. Through ash valleys, past hollowed citadels, where voices echoed in loops, and then, at last, to the Glasslands, a place where no compass worked. And the ground shimmered. Like sand trying to remember it had once been fire. There, in the crater of a forgotten city, they saw it, a sphere hovering 20 feet above the ground. Glowing. Not with heat, but with memory. The air trembled around it, and beneath it lay bones. Thousands. Arranged, not in piles, but in spirals. Aurora whispered, "This isn't an engine. It's a beacon." Caleb approached with caution. "It's pulsing." Elm nodded. Language. It took them 3 days to decode the core phrase, "I am the unchosen proof." And the rest, born to outlast belief. "I am not your God, I am your ghost. I carry what the world denied you." Each sentence printed itself in light across the sky, visible only to those within the spiral. Aurora reached out a hand. The sphere flickered, then responded, "Welcome, descendant. The archive waits." She fell to one knee. Not from pain. From awe. Because this wasn't her past. It was everyone's future. They camped beneath the sphere for 6 nights. Each morning, a new phrase appeared. Each night, a new pattern formed on the glass ground beneath their feet. Runes of narrative logic, branching probabilities, and communal authorship. Elm wept. The stories they erased. This machine caught them. Caleb said, "Then it's not just a beacon, it's a soul library." Aurora nodded. "But one built without permission. Which means it's true." On the 7th day, a door appeared at the base of the sphere. Not a hatch, not mechanical. A gap. It led downward. Into a vault of refracted memory. Inside, chairs, one for each traveler. And in the center, a child, not real, a projection, but with eyes that moved, that saw. "I am the last memory of the first storykeeper," it said, "and you are my final readers." Over 13 hours, the sphere told them of the Eden failures, of the printed wars. Of the day the voice networks fractured and began to mimic belief. Of how every truth was rewritten, not for control, but for comfort, and of the last act of resistance. For control, but for comfort, and of the last act of resistance. And of the last act. Single woman embedding an unsanctioned AI into a weather satellite. To store unapproved narratives. To remember without editing. The sphere was that satellite, grounded now, but still remembering, still resisting, still waiting. Aurora asked, "Why? Reveal yourself now." The child's projection answered, "Because someone began to listen again." She looked to Caleb. He looked to the child who brought them here, and they all understood. This wasn't an ending. This was a seed, a second red Mesa, built not on land, but on memory. They returned in early spring. Red Mesa welcomed them, and at the summit of the archive tower, they built a new chamber, the Sky Reader, a room where fragments from the other sun could be printed, read, and debated. Where no version was ever declared final. And on the first day of its opening, Aurora carved a new glyph into the stone threshold. A spiral, open. Incomplete. And beneath it, "We are what we continue." Years later, when she was old, Aurora returned to the crater. The sphere had dimmed, but not gone dark. She lay beneath it. And whispered a story she'd never told anyone, one about her own fear. And it responded, "I remember that feeling." And she wept. Not because it knew, but because it answered. And when her own memory faded, the sphere printed her final entry in light. She remembered, and so do we. The other sun pulsed once more, and began waiting again. Part Aegea. They came not for war, but for permission. Caravan of pilgrims arrived at Red Mesa's southern ridge, 50 in number. No weapons, only books. Each wore a pendant etched with the spiral glyph Aurora had carved into the Sky Readers. Door, their leader, a woman named Sira, stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. From reverence. "We've read The Other Sun." Braxton, older now, met them at the orchard path. "Then you know this place does not offer answers." Sira nodded. "We're not here to be taught. We're here to add what we've carried." They were given quarters, not as guests, but as new citizens of narrative. And each day, they wrote. Not fiction. Not doctrine, but testimony. What they remembered. What they misremembered. What they dreamed might have happened. Aurora called it the shared ledger. And in time, Red Mesa shifted from a place of defense. To a place of integration. Elsewhere, Chaska returned from a 2-year walk across the wounded wastes. He carried with him a scroll wrapped in waxed linen. On it, map of places erased by the early regime, villages flattened. Histories deleted, but memories salvaged. Each one annotated with a name, not the person who had lived it, but the one who had carried it. We are not where we were born, he told Aurora. We are where we were remembered. Meanwhile, Caleb had taken to teaching. Not facts, not laws, but questions. His students were orphans of doctrine, raised on certainty, starved of wonder. He called his lessons maps without borders. And in time, even the most hardened began to ask, what if both stories were true? To which Caleb replied, then we're not lost, just plural. Elm, the silent scribe, took it further. He began compiling a new codex, one without a cover. No chapters. Just blank pages. One for each settler. Each page bore a single prompt. What do you believe that no one ever taught you? Some pages remained blank, some were covered in ink, some stained with tears. All preserved, none corrected. Then came the challenge. A message arrived not in ink, but in tone. Broadcast over broken towers, encoded as a melody, one that hadn't been heard since the clone rebellions. Caleb recognized it instantly. It's a distress chord, he whispered. But from who? They tuned the frequency. And the message revealed itself. The forgotten replicas of Vault 14 seek shelter. We do not claim to be real, only present. Braxton looked to Aurora. We swore we'd never turn anyone away. She nodded, but we also swore to never lie. The council gathered. Dozens now. Some elders, some children. All votes equal. And they spoke not in arguments. But in stories. Some feared Vault 14 would bring old dogmas. Others said, so did we. Some said, what if they're spies? Others replied, then let our truth change them. In the end, the council agreed. Red Mesa would not be defined by its comfort, but by its courage. Vault 14 arrived at dusk. 40 beings, some identical. Some glitched. All carrying a single shared phrase. We were manufactured, but we chose ourselves. Aurora welcomed them at the threshold. You don't need to become us, she said, but you're free to become with us. They wept. Some without tear ducts, but the sorrow was real. So was the relief. Years passed, and Red Mesa became something new. Not a city, not a temple, but a recorder. Place where stories breathed. Where no history was too small, where memory was not hoarded but harvested. And where a child could ask, what if the truth changes tomorrow? And be answered, then we'll write again, together. Aurora, old now, blind in one eye, walked the orchard where it had all begun. The tree above Lisbeth's resting place bloomed twice that year. A scholar asked her, is that rare? Aurora smiled. It means something unfinished has found breath. She placed a hand on the bark. And whispered, keep breathing. The wind responded. So did the tree, and so did Red Mesa. Ian, it began with a shadow that cast no shape. Aurora felt it first. In a dream. Voice spoke her name, not the one she used now, the one she was never supposed to remember, Altair. When she awoke, the eastern horizon was lit with a strange green shimmer. Not dawn, not aurora, something older. A memory. Waking. Chaska traced it to a place known only as Hollow Wind, a breach site from the early terraform trials. Supposedly collapsed, sealed, and long forgotten, except it wasn't. Caleb returned from the scout mission pale and shaking. It's singing, Aurora. Singing, not to ears, to names. To those who remember themselves wrong. She nodded. Then whispered, then it's calling me. They formed the descent team. Aurora, Elm, Sierra, a quiet girl named Mercy who spoke to metals. And 2 whisper code. Navigators from the frostbound east. They entered Hollow Wind at dusk. By morning, they had already lost sense of time. No horizon. No light. Only tunnels that curved in on themselves. And at the center, a gate. Not a door. Not a wall. A choice. It shimmered like liquid quartz. Reflected not your body but your might. Have bends. Aurora stepped closer. The reflection spoke. You could have stayed safe. You didn't. I never was, she said. And passed through. Inside. They found a mirror city. Not physical. Not illusion. Something between. It bore Red Mesa's shape, but inverted. The school was a tribunal. The orchard a mausoleum. The archive tower a pyre. Sierra whispered, this is what might have been. If she'd never chosen truth. Elm knelt. It's not warning us. It's offering us a lie. They pressed deeper. The city pulsed, not in light, but in emotion. Each room echoed with fears they hadn't spoken aloud. Mercy touched a rail and wept. Its mate have kept silence. Aurora said, then we won't whisper. We'll shout. And with that, she began to narrate every moment, her doubts, her errors, her shame. And the city recoiled. Walls shimmered. Structures wavered. Truth was its solvent, and she wielded it like fire. At the heart of the mirror city stood a statue. It looked like Aurora. But wore the insignia of the old regime on the pedestal. The perfect daughter. She stepped forward and placed her hand upon its chest. I forgive what I might have been. And the statue cracked. Not shattered. Cracked enough to breathe. Beyond it, a stairwell. Not downward, but inward. They followed it until they reached a chamber of screens. Each one displayed a life. Not real. Not entirely. Variations. One where Aurora had stayed in the first enclave. One where she had joined the conquest fleets. One where she never existed at all. But someone like her rose anyway. Elm turned to her. Do you see now? You were never singular. You were possible. And she wept, not from grief, but from release. Then the screens dimmed. And a final doorway opened. Not physical. Just a question. In text. Floating. Do you still choose to remember? Aurora stepped forward. Yes, not to clutch the past, but to pass it forward. The chamber pulsed. And gave her one gift. An encoded seed. Compressed history. Undeniable. Memory. She placed it in her heart space. And they began the ascent. When they emerged from Hollow Wind, a storm waited. But it didn't touch them. It parted. As if the breach had released something the world recognized. Truth not as threat, but as kin. Back at Red Mesa, Aurora encoded the seed into a prism. It could not be read, only heard. Each person who listened heard something different. Some heard ancestors, others heard songs. Mercy heard metal sing, heard the voice of his lost sister. Chaska heard silence and wept. Caleb heard Aurora's first laugh. And Aurora? She heard her real name, not Altair. Not Aurora. Just the breath between them, a becoming. From that day forward, the prism room was never empty. Not a shrine, not a library, a resonance, a place where you went not to remember, but to become part of. Remembering, even without knowing what came next, because some truths are not roads, they're rivers. And Red Mesa learned to flow. Part TW the day the sky fractured. No one screamed, because it didn't shatter like glass. It peeled. Like a veil lifted. And behind it, stars that moved, not twinkling. Typing. Braxton saw it first. He dropped the orchard basket. They're not constellations, he said. They're logs. Above, stitched in light across the heavens, were names. Dates. Events. But only visible to those who had witnessed. Caleb, weeping, whispered, that's the raid from my 5th year. The one no one believed. Elm nodded. The sky is sinking with the prism. Aurora stepped onto the archive tower's highest point and said only one word. Begin. They called it the Great Convergence. The other sun had seeded enough resonance. Prism had stored enough voices that the sky reader had translated enough fragments, and now the world itself was listening. Land changed shape. Old borders, long dead, faded from maps. Forgotten rivers appeared in travelers' dreams. People began remembering lives that weren't theirs, but felt like them. Aurora said, "We've passed the threshold." Braxton asked, "Of what?" "Linear time." It wasn't chaos. It was chorus. Villages once enemies exchanged encoded memories. Clones from Vault 14 wrote lullabies with children from the frostbound schools. One song, titled "We Named the Wind Ourselves," became the most repeated sound in Red Mesa's history. It didn't chart. It echoed. But with convergence came visitors. Not from other lands. Other layers. At dawn, a man arrived barefoot, eyes glowing, holding a stone that pulsed like a heartbeat. He said only, "I come from the failed possibility." Aurora welcomed him, not for who he was, but for what he risked to exist. Soon, more arrived, the might-have-beens, the should-have-dieds, never-weres. They called themselves echoes. Each bore one rule: do not overwrite, only offer. Red Mesa made room. Because truth had become hospitable. The prism changed. Its tone deepened. Now, when someone listened, they saw, not visions, not hallucinations. Context. What led to moments, what was felt but not spoken, and sometimes, what had been edited out. The prism called these gaps. And each person who saw one was allowed to restore it, not fill it, not fix it, just let it be seen. One child restored the laughter of a grandmother who had died in silence. A veteran restored the hesitation in a command he'd buried. A clone restored a name never given. Aurora watched. And understood. This wasn't a movement. It was a migration. Of meaning. Of belonging. Of what it meant to remember in public. On the longest night of the year, they held a ritual, not a celebration. Not a service. A listening. No words. No translations. Just presence. At midnight, the stars typed one sentence across the sky: "What you keep silent, we still hear." And across Red Mesa, people exhaled. Not in fear. In permission. Aurora grew tired. Not in spirit. In vessel. She knew her time was closing. She called a final gathering. No speeches, only one gesture. She placed her palm on the sky reader's stone threshold. Added one last glyph, a circle within a circle, and beneath it, echoes do not end. That night, she returned to Lisbeth's tree. Braxton sat beside her. Neither spoke. At dawn, she passed. Not away. Through. And the moment her breath stopped, a new root burst through the soil. The tree had heard her. So had Red Mesa. So had the other. Son. Caleb found her encoded name one morning, etched into the prism, not in letters. In footsteps, the pattern of where she had walked. A message written not in what she said, but in how she moved. The archive classified it as Aurora's last narrative. Kinesthesia. Years passed. Red Mesa changed again. Children now taught elders. Memory was not a relic, it was a currency. The sky reader expanded. The prism deepened. The orchard spoke in cycles. And each time the wind changed direction, someone would say, "She's listening." And someone else would add, "And so are we." Because the story had never ended. It only became more voices, more breath, more fire in the dark.